Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's expert chat. I'm Ginny with the Understood team, and today we'll be talking about executive functioning and the Batman effect. With us today is Stephanie Carlson, who is a professor and director of research at the Institute of Child Development at the University of Minnesota. Hi, Stephanie. How are you today?
Hi, Ginny. I'm well, thank you.
Would you like to tell our viewers a little bit more about your background?
Sure. So I'm a professor and director of research, as you mentioned, at the Institute of Child Development at the University of Minnesota here in the Twin Cities. And I do research on early childhood play and executive functioning.
Thanks very much, Stephanie. So let's start with our first question. What is the role of make-believe or pretend play in the development of executive functioning in young children? And please explain the Batman effect.
One thing that we were very interested in is kind of mapping the development of executive function through good measurement of it. Just how does it develop? What are the benchmarks or milestones in that? But then also, importantly, how can we help promote executive function skills, especially for children who are late to acquire these skills through lack of exposure and explicit instruction, or who have developmental delays or disorders such as ADHD or autism. So both environmental and kind of organic reasons for some children coming later to these skills or not having as much practice at them than others. So we're very interested in my lab in how to promote the development of executive function skills in very young children. And so I kind of had parallel lines of research going for a number of years. One on play, this really sort of fascinating activity that children spend so much time doing. And then on the other hand, the development of these self-regulation skills that seem to be critically important for academic achievement and beyond. And what my students and I have been doing in the past several years is putting those two things together to see if we could essentially capitalize on an activity that children do naturally, which is pretend. Is that something that could actually be formed to be a strategy to help them with their executive function skills? And so at first blush, it seems like pretending is sort of like anything goes, and you want to be really kind of not particularly self-controlled when you're pretending, because then in order to think outside the box, you need to kind of not be too constrained or like inhibited, and that seems like the opposite of self-control. But in fact, the more we've learned about pretending, the more we see that there's quite a bit of self-regulation inherent in pretending, at least in kind of developmentally mature pretending. So, for example, when children engage in role play, it's not really the case that anything goes. There's sort of a script that you have to follow. So if you are pretending to be, if you're playing house and playing with a peer, and someone's pretending to be the mommy and someone's pretending to be the baby, and you can't really easily step outside of that role and start doing, start just pretending to be a clown in the middle of that kind of script. That would kind of turn off your play partner. They're not really sure where you're going with this, and so there is something regulatory and regulated about pretending. And at the same time, when kids are pretending, so they're engaging in some self-regulation skills, but they're also engaging in what we call psychological distancing. So psychological distancing is when you adopt a different perspective that's not exactly what's right in front of you, but maybe something that is a perspective that is different from the one you usually adopt. So if normally I'm going around as a 4-year-old child, in pretense, I could be a 50-year-old man. I could be a dinosaur. I could be a dragon. I could be something that's based on real life or something that's totally fictional. And so when you adopt different perspectives, you get some distance between yourself and the situation that's right in front of you. So we hypothesized that when kids are pretending to be someone else, that they are getting some practice in taking on that perspective. And so, especially when they pretend to be someone else who's more competent than themselves, they might in turn actually become a little bit more competent. And so this is where the Batman effect comes into play. We discovered that when children are pretending to be someone more competent, like Batman, they actually behave as if they are more competent. And what I mean by competence in this case is they have better executive functioning skills. So we give them an executive functioning measure. And the only thing we change about it is we either ask them to pretend to be Batman while they're doing it, or the character of their choice, or we don't, some other version of not doing that. So we have a lot of control and comparison conditions. But essentially, when children pretend to be someone else who's more competent than them, they in turn perform as if they were as much as a year older on that measure.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, so I think it's sort of maybe the science behind the notion of fake it till you make it, that if you're not quite confident in your skills, if you act as though you have some more confidence or some more expertise, or some higher skill level, you will actually aspire to and be much more likely to attain that higher skill level through imagination.
Again, I find that really fascinating. Stephanie, can you talk a little bit more about, the specifics of your, experiment? I mean, how exactly does this work? How do you work with the children to come up with these results?
Sure. So we work with preschool to kindergarten age children, although these principles very likely apply to older children and adults as well. And other researchers actually do these same kinds of things with adults. But we give them a challenging task. So that could be delaying gratification. So if you think about what's known as the classic marshmallow test, children can have one marshmallow now, or if they wait, they can have two. Or some treat of their choice. And so delaying gratification is hard. It's a challenging task. And what we might do is ask one set of children who are randomly assigned to this condition to think about this challenging task as if you were another character. And so they get to choose. It's not just Batman in our research, although that's a very popular choice. Children could pretend to be Dora the Explorer, Bob the Builder. There are a lot of different characters that they can choose to be. Or we ask them to do it just as their normal selves. Sometimes we actually try to make it a little bit harder for them to, instead of imagining that they're someone else, they have to imagine that they're how yummy the marshmallow tastes. So they're still engaging their imagination, but they're imagining something that's bringing them psychologically closer to the marshmallow. Whereas when they're pretending to be someone with really good self-control, like Batman, we're bringing them psychologically farther away from the marshmallow. Physically, they're the exact same distance from the marshmallow. It's psychologically how far are they from it. And when you get farther away from it psychologically, it turns out that they delay gratification significantly longer.
Okay. I wanted to mention also that Stephanie Carlson has written a blog based on her research and the Batman effect. We're going to put a link to her blog in the chat box. You should really take a few moments and read it. It's really interesting. We have a viewer question, Stephanie. I'd like to read to you. A parent asks, she has a daughter with ADHD, and she's beginning to think that she has more executive functioning issues than anything. I used to be a special educator and understand only a little bit about executive functioning due to the fact that I've only had one child with executive functioning issues. So she's looking for specific characteristics of executive function. We don't have an age here, but what would you say are the specific characteristics of a child that struggles with executive function issues?
Sure. Executive functioning issues are a common denominator or a common symptom for a number of concerns that parents might have about children's behavior or learning. It's part of what can make a lot of those different learning issues have something in common. And so with executive functioning, we're talking about a constellation of skills that include being able to remember your current goal. Just to give an adult example of a failure that I have increasingly in this area is like I'll go upstairs in my house and I'll find myself upstairs and then I can't remember why I went upstairs. What's happening there is it was a failure to keep the goal in mind. Or my daughter, I have college and high school daughters, and even still in high school, my daughter will lose her keys. And it's failure of being mindful in the moment about what your goal is. Another component is inhibitory control or impulse control. So this is resisting temptation or kind of resisting the knee-jerk reaction or the first thing that comes to mind. And instead slowing down and thinking about things in a different way where you can, resist that temptation to maybe lash out at someone or say the first thing that comes to mind and blurt it out or resist the marshmallow in the example that I just gave. Mm-hmm. And then the third feature is cognitive flexibility. So this is being able to flexibly and nimbly shift from one way of thinking about a problem or a situation to another way. And part of academic difficulties and executive function, part of the reason they're linked is that children with executive function difficulties will be very persistent at a strategy that's not working. So they tend to get stuck more easily in a way of thinking about a problem or a situation, if it's a math problem or a conflict with a friend. Kind of get this tunnel vision and have a harder time panning out and getting a bigger picture on the situation and realizing that you have some options here in how to respond or some choices in how to think about this. And so it's another area where pretending in the early years when it's such a natural thing for kids to do anyway, turns out to be a way that they can practice that skill of all three of those skills, really, because they have to keep in mind what the current role is, who are they pretending to be and what's the script there. And they have to inhibit switching to reverting back to, say, being themselves. If they're supposed to be in character, you have to do things a little bit differently and resist the way that you normally do things. And then you have to be able to shift flexibly between different perspectives. And so that's really the crux of role play is all about perspective taking and shifting perspectives. So practice at those skills and, in training your brain and mind to use those skills, may facilitate kids who have executive functioning difficulties, whether it's just because they're normal preschoolers or because they have longer lasting difficulties with it, to pan out, see their choices for responding, take a moment to reflect on their thoughts, actions, and feelings before they act on it.
Mm-hmm. All right. And of course, we see that some kids are able to delay gratification better than other kids. What makes the kids that can delay gratification able to do so? And is that a sign of, perhaps academic achievement?
Yeah, so delaying gratification, it certainly involves executive function skills. but it also, there's also kind of a temperament or personality aspect to delaying gratification. That's not just purely about the neurocognitive skills that are necessary to do so. Some kids and adults have a personality that's a little bit more likely to be impulsive or versus to delay gratification or to save versus spend. All of these things can be tied to both the neurocognitive skills and some personality skills, and so it's those individual differences are multi-dimensional. But the important news is that it can be cultivated. So it's unlike the way we typically think about personality or temperament. You think, well, that's how you're born. It's just sort of how you're wired. That's not the end of the story. It's really delay of gratification and other executive function skills can be trained and cultivated in early childhood and beyond.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that, preschools or kindergartens do promote this? Is it part of, an educational program?
Increasingly, yes.
Yeah.
We, and through your efforts at Understood, are gradually getting the word out, I think, about the importance of executive function skills as the foundation for learning. There is, however, it's an uphill battle going against some of the what is traditionally valued in education of literacy and numeracy, and those matter, of course, but we're really interested in helping to build the foundation for learning so that when children are introduced to those subjects, it's an easier, they have an easier go of it because they already have these neurocognitive skills in place. So gradually preschools, educators, progressive public schools and charters are catching on to this idea and emphasizing these skills in addition to the traditional academic skills.
And going back to, your discussion about pretend play, there's a lot of debate about kindergartens being too academic, and I suppose, your research shows that there is indeed a very good reason to maybe postpone some of those academics and to really capitalize on the pretend play.
Absolutely. Playtime is being encroached upon kind of year by year, less recess time and so forth, and it is a hugely controversial issue. But the evidence is building, and this is just our work in our lab is just one piece of that evidence to suggest that that play and pretending really do play a fundamental role in learning.
Very interesting. We have another viewer question, Stephanie, and this parent has an 11-year-old who has ADHD and dyslexia, and now she's thinking that he has executive functioning issues because he has trouble learning, he has retention issues. So again, she's looking maybe for some confirmation. Do you see those characteristics as being indicative of an executive functioning issue?
And I think again, it's hard with only a little bit of knowledge of any one case, but I think again, speaking to your earlier question, increasingly educators are coming to understand, and this is not just in special education, but education more broadly, that executive function, when children arrive at school with these skills in place, or when they are remediated for kids who are slow to develop them, that's the turning point for starting to see some of these improvements in learning. And it's a little bit of a backdoor approach compared to directly working on the academic problem, let's say. But taking a step back and saying, well, let's think about what might be some of the underlying neurocognitive skills that just haven't been cultivated yet, and how can we practice and build those skills over time.
Okay. Now, the parent came back and mentioned that a lot of these issues are specifically around math. So I don't know if that changes your response.
Yeah. So part of this growth and understanding of the role of executive function in learning is to help understand through our research and through our messaging around this that it's not an either or kind of thing, that well, we don't have enough time in school to focus on just math as it is, and kids are we're 27th out of 32 countries in math achievement, which is not a great position to be in. And so if there's not even enough time for math instruction, why would we add time for executive function in classrooms and trying to build those skills too? And our answer to that is, we really can combine those. Executive function issues and difficulties are at the heart of early math learning problems. So, for example, when kids first learn, kids usually first learn addition, and only later would learn multiplication. When addition becomes rote, so like 3 plus 3, no problem. And then you introduce multiplication, and all you're doing is taking that sign, the plus sign, and turning it this way, and then you say, okay, what's 3 times 3? And the child says 6. It's an executive function issue where they've failed to keep in mind the new rule. They're going on autopilot, or failing to control the impulse of responding to that question through the function of addition, and failing to shift flexibly from thinking about that problem in the old way to thinking about it in a new way. Okay. And so I think working with educators, we can help, together come to understand that math difficulties and reading difficulties have at their roots some executive function issues. And so we can really treat these things together rather than thinking about them as being separate.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for explaining that. And I do want to mention to the viewers that if you do think that your child is showing some symptoms of executive functioning issues, it's always a great idea to talk to your pediatrician about it, and then you can discuss with your pediatrician what next steps you might take. So, just a little, word there. All right, we have time for one more question, Stephanie, and actually we might be able to squeeze in 2, but what about private speech and verbal thought? I've done some reading about your work, and how can private speech, or, I guess that's talking to yourself in a sense, right? And verbal thought facilitate executive functioning? Can that help?
Yeah, absolutely. So self-regulation is very much verbally mediated, and that means that it's self-directed speech that we use, whether we realize it or not, throughout the day to control our thoughts, actions, and emotions. And our ability, our unique human capacity for self-regulation very likely stems from the fact that we have speech. And so we can display great heights of control over thoughts, actions, and emotions, and great heights, unparalleled in through our imagination. We can invent things, imagine things that that no one had ever thought of before, and so much of our technology and innovation today is a result of that amazing power of imagination that we have, again, made possible through speech.
So if a child has a language delay, it's conceivable that his executive functioning skills would be that much weaker. Would that be something that you could, do you see that in your research?
Yes, we haven't researched that topic specifically, but we certainly have colleagues who are very interested in specific language delays and general language delays and subsequent difficulties with executive function.
Okay.
And so it really plays an important role, and the reason is very likely that we we essentially talk ourselves through challenging tasks. And we do that especially when the task is new or novel. And that's precisely when we need to engage our executive function skills. So if you think about it, when you first are learning to drive, it's really challenging. There's so many things to keep in mind, so many things to remember. Nothing's automatic yet. And you are, it's almost like your brain hurts because you are really using those executive function skills. Once that becomes learned and automatic, you can start to have conversations while you're driving. You can, unfortunately, people think they can text while they're driving or something like that because it's become so automatic. And you're no longer at that point engaging your executive function skills. But when you're first learning a new skill or anything like that, you're really working those prefrontal brain areas and also needing to talk yourself through the task. And we've done research, and others have done research, for example, that if you prohibit a person who's learning a new skill, or a child or an adult, if they're trying to learn a new skill and you tell them, okay, while you're learning this, I want you to keep saying like the word Monday. Say Monday, 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 Monday. While you're learning this new skill, you actually can't learn the new skill, or you don't learn it very well because you've got this interference and you weren't allowed to use your inner speech to talk yourself through the new task. And it's on a continuum with pretending. So pretending is just another instantiation of verbally mediated thought that is psychologically distant from reality. But it helps to pretend to be Batman, but it also helps, not quite as much, but it helps some if you refer to yourself in the third person while you're doing this challenging task. So if we go back to the marshmallow test, kids do better on that if also, or tasks like it, I should say, if they think to themselves, what should Stephanie do? So using your own name and speaking to yourself in the third person, again, you're using speech, and it puts a little bit more perspective on the situation and a little more distance on the situation compared to if you're focusing, really deeply on how yummy the marshmallow would taste.
Okay, very, very interesting, and I'm going to have to remember that for myself. All right, the last question, which ties in really nicely with the question I was going to ask you, is from a viewer. What are some specific and practical strategies to help middle schoolers who struggle with executive functioning to remember assignments and manage time? So what tips, and can you also recommend any, resources?
Sure. So using scaffolds, so any kind of structure that's going to be strong and robust and be able to stand on its own is not built in a day, and it's not built by itself. It's built, if you think about like the Empire State Building, it needed a scaffold in order, as it was being developed or built, in order for it to have a strong foundation and remain as it is today. So any kind of new skill that's challenging needs some scaffolding from the environment, so from caregivers, from parents. With respect to planning, and I struggle with this as a parent myself, and probably preach this more than I practice it. But using technology in terms of reminders, using calendars, helping the child through making lists, preparing the night before, laying out everything you're going to need for school the night before. That all, they can't do that on their own yet, and they need scaffolding to do that. The idea is if you work on that, those things become internalized. They become more intrinsic, and you can gradually remove the scaffolding, and the child is self-regulating on those things. Mm-hmm. That's the idea. It's easier said than done. With resources, I hesitate again to prescribe anything. Speaking with your physician is always a good first step. But a lot of tutoring organizations now are focusing more on executive function skills and some of these organizational skills, and not solely or even at all, in some cases, the academics. And so there are some tutoring resources that can help with some of these organizational skills for middle schoolers.
Right, and I think sometimes we would call that like coaching also. Yeah. Okay, great. All right, so this has been a great chat. For those of you watching, Understood has many resources on executive functioning, so please, do a search, and I'm sure you'll find some helpful resources. Thank you again, Stephanie, for being with us. This has been really fascinating, and now I really understand the Batman effect.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Okay, and viewers, thank you so much for joining. If you've missed any part of this chat or would like to watch it again, we archive all of our chats at u.org/calendar. Thank you once again for your questions, and we'll see you next time. Have a great day.